If you're swatching for a project knit in the round, like this top-down raglan sweater that I'm wearing, then you want to knit your swatch in the round as well. This simple hack is not only one of the easiest ways to swatch in the round, but I also think it's one of the most accurate. I'm Isolde, I'm a knitwear designer from Edinburgh, Scotland. You can find my patterns on my website isolde.com and Ravelry. Even very experienced knitters can end up with a slight difference in gauge when they're knitting flat versus in the round. The reason is really simple. When you're knitting flat, especially if you're knitting a stockinette stitch or a pattern based on it, then you knit a row, you turn your work over and you purl back. When you're knitting in the round, you're just doing a continuous spiral of knit rounds and you're never purling. And it's really common to have a slight difference in tension between your knits and purls. So knitting in the round, no purls, your gauge might be a bit different than when you're knitting flat and you've got 50% knits and 50% purl. Unfortunately, knitting a swatch in the round is not as simple as it sounds at first. When you're knitting a small circumference in the round, like a sleeve or a sock, you might use DPNs, magic loop, and those methods can affect your tension. You might have experienced this, you might have knit a sweater where the sleeves came out a little tight, and that was because your tension was tighter on the sleeve than it was on the body. So it's not going to work great to knit or swatch for a whole garment on something like magic loop or DPNs. Even knitting a larger tube on a 16-inch circular, 40cm circular that you might use for a hat, you might also find that affects your gauge. Just with those shorter needle tips, how you hold it might be different. So that's not super accurate. And that leaves us with knitting a really large swatch. And you could knit a swatch as big, almost as big as the sweater body as your swatch, and it would be really accurate. You need a lot of yarn and a lot of time, and I know I don't want to knit a swatch that big. So enter this option. It's kind of a hack, a way to fake swatching in the round, and it uses the important feature of knitting in the round, which is not that it's a tube, it's that you're only working knit stitches. This method means that you can use the exact same needles as your project and avoid any slight differences caused by different tips, materials, different lengths of tips. You can avoid any potential tension issues with magic loop, DPNs, etc. And you don't have to knit a really giant swatch. So that is why this is by far my favorite way to swatch in the round, and I use this for every project that I knit in the round. It's really important for this method, even more important than it usually is, that you won't be measuring your gauge right on the edges, because those edge stitches are going to be really loose and messy. So you want to make sure you get a nice clear 4 inches or 10 centimeters in the middle where your gauge is consistent to measure. And that means that you want to take your target gauge from your pattern over 4 inches, 10 centimeters and multiply that by 1.5. So in this case, for this project that I'm swatching for, my target gauge is 18. So I've multiplied 18 by 1.5, which gives me 27. So I've cast on 27 stitches, and I'll show you how to work your first row and how this process actually works. I'm going to keep my right side facing, so my yarn tail is here. I'm going to start by sliding all my stitches to the other end of my needle, and we're going to bring the yarn, these tails here, from our last stitch worked across the back so that we can start again at the beginning of the row. And of course, I'm using my circular needle because I'm going to use a circular needle for the garment, and it also facilitates this method. So then my first cast on stitch is here on my left needle tip, and I'm just going to insert my needle, and what I'm doing is pinching the yarn in my left hand just to try and keep this tail across the back a bit loose, and then I'm going to knit my first stitch. And the first couple of stitches will end up a bit loose. It doesn't matter, we're not going to measure those, and I'm just going to work across this row. At the end of the first row, I'll slide my stitches back along the needle. I'll show you continental this time, just because I know sometimes it can help to see something done the way that you knit. So again, I'm going to trail it across the back. I'm actually going to just loop one of my right fingers through that loop to try and keep it nice and loose and open, and then again I'll knit across. And you can see my strands here are pretty loose, and if you're struggling to keep them loose, it's okay if they get tighter, but you might need to cut them in order to lay your swatch flat. I'm just going to carry on in that way until my swatch is long enough. Once the swatch is more or less square, it's a bit hard to tell when it's curling, and you'll be able to measure 4 inches or 10 centimeters vertically to measure your row gauge. Then we want to bind off the usual way. Again, I just pulled the yarn around the back. Your swatch is now bound off and ready to wash and block. You can just leave it to soak in some lukewarm water for about 15-20 minutes. Squeeze out the excess with a towel and then lay it flat to dry. I don't use pins or stretch anything to kind of hold it stretched out while I'm blocking it. I just let it dry flat, and then once it's dry, my favorite little tip is to give it a bit of a tug on opposite corners, do both, and then I like to sort of toss it around, really let the gauge relax into what it wants to be, because that is how your fabric on your garment will behave when you're actually wearing it. So that's what we care about for making sure that projects fit. So toss it around and then put it on a flat surface and measure with a ruler, not your old stretched out tape measure. Let me know in the comments whether you've tried this method of swatching and whether you have noticed a difference in your gauge between knit and purl. I'd be really interested in that. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss my next tutorial video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!